All right. Um, all right. Sorry for starting a little late. It's a little preoccupied earlier, but welcome to the 7th lecture of the Ruby on Rails Decal. I know quite a few people aren't here because there's a 188 midterm tonight. But yeah. First off, logistical things. Both homework 1 and homework 2 should be graded. If they, you can check on the Ruby on Rails Decal website that if you go to the website and you click on your profile, it should show the number of check-ins you have and the total points you've got on assignments. And if you have 0 for homeworks 3 and 4, that's normal. We haven't started grading that. But if you have a 0 for homework 1 or 2 and you think there was a misgrade, just fire us, make a private post on Piazza, and we will attempt to fix that. You could also check how many check-ins you should how many check-ins you have at this point. So yeah. Let's see. Second announcement. The project 2 specs are released. Did everyone get an email for that? Did anyone read the specs? No. Okay, totally fine. Let's see, too long didn't read. The only thing you have to do relatively soon is find a team, or basically a group of 3 to 4 people to work with for your second project, and you have to submit your team, the names of the people on your team, to a Google Doc that's linked on the assignment spec by the end of this week. We will use these names to assign a TA to your group that'll work with you to complete the project, and and you'll check in with this TA along the way to make sure that everything's running smoothly and that the project you plan to do meets the minimum requirements. Details about the project. It is basically you get to think of an idea and make a Rails application to implement that idea. The only thing that we require is a minimum amount of complexity, which is a certain number of models and a certain number of relationship between the models. You will have a little bit over a month to do this project. Just as a note that we gave pretty much the exact same project, or like the exact same minimum requirements to the students last semester, and they had like about 2 less weeks. So you have 2 extra. So it should be pretty chill, and hopefully you'll have fun and learn a lot from it. All right, so basically what we're doing this week is finishing our app that we were building from last week. And if you don't remember, our app was named Quitter, or basically Quitters for Quitters. We will post tweets or posts about things that we want to quit. Basic idea, people post about what they're quitting. And the second thing that we haven't implemented yet is admins moderate posts to make sure that they're appropriate. And instead of the future, it's now. So the roadmap so far, first we built a user and post models. Next, we made user authentication, which is the devise library that we imported and used to do all our sign-ins and sessions. 3 validations and associations, making sure that posts have content to them and that all the posts are related to a user. We were able to create routes, a user ability to look at users, an index to show all the posts, the ability to edit and update a post or a quit, and the ability to create a quit. So right now, the problem is we have no authorization. If you remember from the end of last lecture that anyone can edit someone else's quit, which is something we don't want anyone to do. And what we'll also do is create admins, which admins have basically all the power they want. They could start deleting quits, or they could edit any quit they want. Basically, the way we're going to solve this is using a library called can, which, like devise, is something that we could just simply plug into our Rails application. And we could just write some logic, and every time our Rails application runs and tries to show a certain resource, for example, a post, that can will check to see if that certain user has these abilities that you've given it. And if it does, it will allow the user to proceed. And if it doesn't, it will raise an error. And we'll show how to implement this gem and use it at a basic level in the live coding portion. And the second part of this lecture is Heroku, or basically, how can I make this application available for anyone to use? And what that means is right now, with what we've learned in the past 6 weeks, we've created web applications, but we've always been running them on local hosts, or in other words, the only person that can access it is yourself, which kind of defeats the purpose of a web application. What we're going to do today is finish what we have of Quitter, and then push Quitter onto Heroku, which will host this website for us, and then anybody in the world can start using this application. Do you have any questions before I go into the live coding portion about any of the topics or the second project? Yes.
About the Heroku thing, I'm curious if it's used like in large scale products, like unit products, or if they move for a more focused server.
Like AWS, for example?
Yeah.
Okay. So I don't remember any off the top of my head that are on Heroku right now. What a lot of people use Heroku for is for the beginning phase, because it's up for, basically they give you like, I want to say 18 hours of the day where the application is up. You get to have 10,000 rows on your database all for free. But if you immediately start using AWS, you have to start paying off the bat. And what a lot of people do is they usually host their website on Heroku first, because they just don't want to deal with any configurations. And eventually, as far every company I know moves up to using AWS, for example. And I don't know any off the top of my head that are still on Heroku. There are applications that I maintain that are on Heroku that have thousands or tens of thousands of rows, actually. The Rails Decal website used to have tens of thousands of rows, where I had to pay extra for a larger database until I dropped everything a few weeks ago. But yeah. So Heroku can handle a semi-large application. I was not receiving thousands of requests per second at that level, but if you're receiving that kind of traffic, and for example, you're making a product, you could usually say, oh, there's enough interest. You could tell if there's enough interest that you want to maybe learn how to migrate it off Heroku, or pay extra to have handle all the scaling for you. So yeah. All right. So I'm going back to my Quitter app. I'll make this larger. Is that going to, okay, maybe not that large. And what I'm going to first do is run my Rails S to start up my server. Tab, open up my text editor, and go to localhost 3000, just refresh this. And this is the Quitter app that I had from before. All right. First thing I want to do right now is something that I was supposed to do, that I wanted to do at the end of lecture last week, but we were running out of time. It's just to simply create a button on the main page for me that links to a form to create a post. So first thing I will do is look at the HTML for my home page, which routes to posts index. So if I wanted to find that, I would go to application or app/views/posts index. And now I'm gonna make this bigger. Basically, I see all posts and create a p tag for every post that I find in my database. What I'm going to now do is create a link to create a new post. So I make sure I have an equal sign in my embedded Ruby so that it appears on the page, and I say equals link _2. And on this link, I'm going to give this the label create new quit, and a comma, and then I have to give it a path. And in case I forgot what my paths were, I have my handy command line tool called rake routes. Okay, I wish. Rake routes, press enter, shows me all my routes, and the one to create a new post is this prefix right here, new _ post. So I copy and paste that, open my text editor, new _ post, path, save, go back to my app, refresh, and now I have a link called create new quit. I click on it, and I could create a new quit. Say I quit Neopets. Create post, and now I have a Neopet quit that's under my name. All right, that's just something I wanted to finish off from the previous lecture that I didn't get to. Okay, so if we recall from last lecture, I have the ability to edit my own posts, which is totally okay. Instead of quitting drinking, I'll quit smoking, update post, go back to my index, and now it's smoking. But another user that I called Brandon at chen.com posted a quit called hi. And unfortunately, what I can do is say, Brandon, instead of quitting hi, you're quitting RuneScape. Because you really should at this age. But so the thing is, I was able to edit Brandon's post, even though ideally I shouldn't have that ability. What I could do is build an authorization system from scratch and integrate with my controllers and write a bunch of code and write a bunch of tests to make sure that it works. But instead, what I'm going to do is rely on a library that other people have created and maintained and constantly work on to do this for me. So normally I would just do a Google search of like an authorization library, but I know one off the top of my head called can. You just could Google can, you'll get a GitHub page. And right here is the library, and it talks about, this is an authorization library for Ruby on Rails. Information about its mission, but let's skip all that. I just care about, I want to use this as soon as possible. So first, they give me what to put in my gem file to add this as a dependency. I will copy and paste what they give me in the installation instructions. Go open my text editor and go open to my gem file. And if you remember, my gem file is at the top level of my Ruby application. Go to my gem file. I'll also put it after gems I've added on last week. Save. And what I'll do is run bundle install. And it'll install all the dependencies. So now I should have can in my Rails application. Next, I'll see how to get started. After, you could read through this yourself, but I'm going to skip to the main part of this, which is Rails G can ability. What can does is it reads through a file called ability.rb, and ability.rb defines what permissions a user can have or can't have. So I'll copy this line, run it. And what we'll do is, I'll just make this bigger so you can see, it'll create a file for me in my application folder /models called ability.rb. If I open my text editor, go to app, my models, and go to ability.rb, this is a file that was generated for me. So I'm just going to delete the doc string. The doc string is automatically generated as like a basic how to use. But since I'm going to explain the basics, I'll just delete that to clear out space. Do we have any questions so far before I get into how ability.rb works? All right, so within the documentation, you can see that can expects something called current_user. And what it will do every time you're in a controller is run the ability class on top of the current user. Where do we define current user? Does anyone remember? Yeah. Exactly. Devise, lucky for us, provides a current user. So when we added the devise gem and made devise controllers, we now have access to current_user. So this can library goes hand in hand with devise. They work together, provide great synergy. But in case you don't want to use current user, they have documentation of how to route to your own kind of authentication system. But since we're using the standard library, it provides us a file that will automatically access current user. So there are 2 points in this application, or there are 2 states you can be when using our application, and that is logged in or logged out. If you're logged in, current user, which gets passed into our initialize method, will be an active user object with the methods, the columns on it. But what if no one signed in? Does anyone know what current user would be? All right, I'll just tell you. Current user will be nil. And if we start writing logic on a nil object, we'll get like an error that says, oh, nil does not have this method. So what we can do is use something called an or equals in Ruby. And can anyone guess what this operator does? Yes, that's exactly right. So basically, if we have any kind of false value in this variable, basically, if you either have nil or just the Boolean value false, it'll run the expression on the right and assign it to it. But in case it's not null, like we do have a current user, it'll just do nothing. But what I've done with this is basically safeguard user from just being nil, and at least being an empty user. And let's now go back to defining abilities, or more documentation of how to use this library, and how to basically authorize access to items. So in defining abilities, they will talk about, see right here, they have this user or equals user.new, just to make sure that you won't run into any errors if you're not currently signed in, because this authorization will run on pretty much every request. You could ignore this user.admin part, but look at this line here, can::manage::all. And they have an explanation of what the can method does. Basically, the can method in can defines a permission for objects. So the permissions that exist for the can method are read, create, update, and destroy, which are right here. And if you remember, that is the CRUD acronym, except slightly out of order. Those are the 4 possible actions you could do on the object. And the second argument to the can is an object. What you pass in is a Ruby model. And what this will say is that your user can, like, for example, read this object. This user can update this object. So first of all, what I know that every user can do is read posts. So I could just say can::read, posts. And right now with this ability.rb, this user, or all users, can read any post. I will go back to my controller, open my post controller, and do a second thing. And in the documentation for the can library, to make sure that our user is allowed to read something, we have to put in the controller this method, load and authorize resource. There's a bunch of text up there that explains a bunch of little stuff, but the easiest way to use this library is just to plug load and authorize resource at the top of the controller. So I could just go post controller and put that in the top. And what that'll do is make sure every time I'm loading something, for example, like a post, that I'll make sure my user has access to it. Okay, let's start. So a general rule is every time you run bundle install, you should restart your server. So I'm going to kill my process and recall Rails S, and that should start up my server. Go to localhost 3000, and everything makes sense so far. Nothing has changed that's apparent, because before I could always read everything, but I've just now I've just explicitly just said, okay, my users can read all the posts. Okay, here's the interesting thing. I was just denied an edit after I clicked the edit button. Why? Because all I said about a post was a user can read it. And if you could see, can raises this error called access denied. So if I go back to like RuneScape, edit this, I am unable to edit Brandon's post. But a problem has come up. I want to be able to edit my own post because I do have access to that. How can I fix that? So if I go to can and look at defining abilities again, like if I didn't know anything, I could just look at this document because they provide good documentation. I could just read through this and find an example that matches what I want. Here, a hash of conditions. And in this part of the documentation, if you want me to zoom in, I can. But basically, I could define like a can read project and give it a hash map of conditions. This basically evaluates to a hash the same way. This is an options hash towards the right too. These last two arguments are part of an options hash, which we know how to do. It's just in a different style than the way we normally do it. But just imagine there are three arguments. One is the ability that you give it. Two, the model that you act on. And three, the optional third argument is a hash of conditions. And what this says is if project.active is true and project.user_id equals the current user's ID, if you remember, user was passed in ability.rb, so it's that the current user's ID, that we're given the ability to read a project. Now, we don't have projects. What we have are posts. So I'm going to find in another line, I'm going to say I can edit, update, because it's CRUD. I could update the post. Given what conditions? Anybody think of conditions that I could know that I would be able to determine that this post is editable by me? How does a post how do you identify a post belongs to a user? Yeah, exactly. So a post, if you remember, we added a user ID column to it. So I could just do user_ID and make an options hash, have the key be the column on the post. The value is the value we're trying to equate it with, which is our current users.id method. And just for reference, just to kind of match the syntax of the documentation, this line is exactly the same as this line here. Do you have any questions so far about this? Okay, and just for some background information, that the reason why this syntax exists is this is actually the regular hash syntax where this is a key rocket value, and on the left side the key is a symbol, and the right side the key ends up being user.id, which is a string. And the reason why that's useful is that in case you want to make a hash that's not using symbols as keys, the reason why we have this syntax right here is syntactic sugar, that usually when you have keys, you have them as symbols. They have symbols are mutable strings, they hash to the same value, so that's why people ideally use these symbols. But in case you had a hash map, it's not in Rails, you're just doing regular Ruby, and you wanted to hash the integer 3 to user.id, you would use 3, then a rocket. This is what we call this equals greater than sign, a rocket, to its value. But we already have the syntactic sugar for it, so we'll just keep that. Now, I'll just refresh our application. I'll look at smoking, and before, when I clicked edit this, I was unable to edit it. I had my access denied. But now I can. Smoking, add any amount of strings to it, and click update, and it's saved. And that's because when I clicked on this, my controller ran, my post controller, to handle the requests, because my router sent the request to my post controller. In my controller, I said load an authorized resource, which means make sure every time I load a resource that I'll check through, I'll run my ability.rb and make sure my user has access to that resource. And I said that a user can update a post if the user's ID, if the current user right here, this user.id to right, matches the post user ID. Questions? And just to make sure that this works is that, if you remember, this is Brandon's post. This isn't me, right? So Brandon has a different user ID than me. So when I try to edit this, I should get an access denied, because now I know it's not my post. Okay, here's something I want to do to improve the UI of my application. I want to make sure that if I don't have the ability to edit this item, that I shouldn't even get the link to show up. How do I do that? How do I access a user's abilities in my view? Thankfully, can also provides me this. And right here in this part of the documentation, it says check abilities and authorization. And apparently it could provide me methods in my views called can and cannot. And I could use these to check whether or not my current user can, for example, update an article. And if it can update an article, it could create a link. Otherwise, that link won't show up. So I could edit my show view for a particular post. I go to app/views/post/show.html.erb and put a conditional on this link. I could say if I can update, I believe update comma at post, and I will check the documentation, make sure that's right. If can update comma, yeah, at article. If, and I forgot an opening %sign. If I could update a particular post, an end clause to this. So if I could update the post, give me a link. If I can't update the post, don't render this link. And I'll now refresh my Twitter, and bam, I don't get the link on Brandon's, but Smoking and Neopets belong to me, and now I get the link that correctly works. And I can correctly update it. And RuneScape, and now that works. Questions so far? Is there anything you want me to go over again? Yes.
Can you try going to that link?
Can I try going to the link?
Nice.
So you basically what you're asking me is if I go to the URL to edit something, for example, my post/1, right? Edit this, I can access it from a URL, right? Just refresh it and do that. So the question is, can I just do this? If you remember, post2 belongs to Brandon, right? So if I go to post2/edit, well, can prevent me from going there. I hit it, yes. Load an authorized resource. Yes, I could change the error that pops up. Let's see, I did not prepare for that, but let's just do live coding. So basically, to kind of catch the error, you have something called rescue from, and then you have to say what type of error you rescue from. If you might have done this in 61B where some of your projects, you'll have to raise like a special type of error, and if you catch the type of errors you want, you know how to handle it, right? So in the can access denied, what I can do is rescue from, I'll just copy and paste this into my editor. And I believe I just put this at the top of the controller, yeah. At the top of controller, I could just do rescue from can access denied to exception. And I'm not gonna alert anything, or I could leave an alert. I'll just redirect to my root URL, which should go back to my home page. So ideally, if this is really plug and play, what I can now do is just go to post/2/edit, and it'll just redirect me, which is really nice. And instead of doing your home page, you can render like a 404 page or a special page that tells users that, hey, you don't have access to this. Nice try. Any more questions or things that you want me to go over? Oh, yes.
Yeah, so can obviously like, it's basically just kind of like a cleaner way of just like checking you have like optimization, like permissions, rather than just like having statements everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
But does it like afford us anything else? Just like maybe like more speed up rather than having to call like current user like every single time or something? Like, is there anything special about it? Because I mean, you still have to add like quite a few. You still have to like add if statements in places. And you still have to like deal with like exceptions and throws, and you still have to like copy paste a lot of lines in places. So does it really like give us anything else except for just like everything's like already in the library of optimization?
Okay, that's okay, let me think about that before I say something silly, I guess. Does it offer, it does not offer anything that you can't make by yourself. But it's just the whole niceness of we can put all levels of authorization in one place instead of having like a distributed check across multiple controllers. It's basically a better way of just organizing your authentication. For example, let's say at one point you have like instead of a regular user and admin, you have something in between an admin and a regular user, right? And that yeah, like a freemium user, or there's just a free user and a premium user and an admin. And later you realize there's a feature that you've given only premium users that you now want to give to all the users. Instead of going through all your controllers and changing like the if-else statements there, that you have just the singular place where you change it once and it should affect all the controllers where you say, hey, make sure this validation occurs. Yeah. All right. So next thing I want to show is just, or that I promised about this application, is making sure that there are admins. And these admins have access to everything. So how do I store whether or not a user is an admin? A very simple way is just to add a column, like a Boolean column that says admin, right? But it's not the most common way of doing it. And it's due to the fact that later as an application grows, you can realize that there are more than one role, for example, right? You could have like multiple roles. For example, there's a free user, a premium, maybe there's a special type of user that could do like a lot of things but doesn't have full access as an admin should. And you create that, right? And if you figure these along the way, what you're going to do is basically continually add more columns to it and make the logic complicated. We won't go over, well, I won't immediately go over exactly how to do that, but I'm just making sure that you're all aware that just adding an admin column might not be the best way of doing admins. But for the sake of this code example, that's what I'm going to stick to. So first of all, I want to now add a new column called admin on my user object. So I could just generate a migration, Rails G migration, add admin to users, and I'll say the column called admin, and the type is Boolean. And it generated a migration file. I'm just going to look at it for a quick sanity check. And if you remember, migrations are in db/migrate. And now I have this new migration called add admin to users. And it inferred from the file name that I should add a column to users. And I told that the generator that the column is called admin, the type is Boolean. Interesting thing I can do, I'm just going to do this because I haven't shown it to you before, is that you could actually give default values to a database column. So I'm just going to say that this column defaults to false. And what I can now do is rake db migrate, run the migration, and add that column to my users. So let's see. Next, I'm going to go to my ability.rb and say that if my current user is an admin, I have unlimited access. So what I can now do is check to see if user.admin can :manage, all. And your question might be, what is manage and what is all? These are special symbols in can. That if I show you in defining abilities doc, can manage, this is the exact code on here, but basically what can manage all is when you give it the symbol manage, it means I could read, update, destroy, create. It just gives me all four of those. All, normally the second argument is a Ruby model, right? Or your class that says what you're putting this validation on. But I put all, which means that I gave it the symbol all, and when can reads that, it will say you can edit anything you want now, like all the objects. And that's what an admin should do. So I have saved this file. Now I'm going to reload my application, but I'm going to do something a little different this time. So if you remember that right now, since I'm not Brandon, I can't see Brandon's link. But if I were an admin, I should be able to edit Brandon's thing. So I could just do Rails C for Rails console, on my console, and find the user that is me. So I'm going to just use to find one. Since I was the first user, I'm going to assume my ID was 1. And just a little tip, if you do underscore in Ruby, it will give you the last value that was evaluated. So if I forgot to save it to a variable, I could just say u equals underscore, and now I've attached u with the previous value. So I could say u.admin equals true. And u.admin question mark evaluates to true. And if you're wondering what the question mark is that on a Rails model, that if it's a Boolean column, they'll give you an extra method that is the name of that column plus the question mark. And you might think that is super silly because I have the column which would naturally do the same thing. But the reason why they have that is there's within the Rails community, there is a belief of the right way to do things. And when you have methods that return back true or false values, they just like to append question marks on it. For example, the can method in your view, even though like I'm not developing for can, it's just much of the community likes to have question marks to say that the output of this method is a Boolean, and since that can method was going to see if true that I had access and false if I didn't, that it has a question mark on it. Does that make sense? Or even if you don't like that belief, that is the belief of the community, and it's best that you follow it for now until you get a lot more experience. Then you could think, okay, I might want to break away from this. But there's one last thing I forgot to do, and right now it's just that my admin on my Ruby environment, or sorry, my user on my Ruby environment is an admin, but according to my database, it's not. So I just do u.save. I'm currently an admin, and now I refresh. And like before, I have the ability to edit my existing posts. But now that I'm an admin, howard@chen.com is admin, I go to Neopets and RuneScape. Oh wait, that's not mine. I mean, that is mine. I could go to the RuneScape post, and now the edit link appears again. It's because now it evaluates true to the fact that I do have access. And when I hit edit this, RuneScape, blah, 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 update post, I've successfully edited Brandon's post. Okay, what are your questions about this? Because that's the main, that is the minimum part I wanted to create for this application. Okay, so the second part of this lecture shouldn't take too long, and that is, how do I make sure that this website can be accessed by anybody, for example? Because right now, I've created a web application, I think it's really cool, but I'm stuck on localhost 3000. You don't have access to my localhost 3000. How do I make sure that everyone in this classroom can actually access this website? The tool I talked about earlier was Heroku. So go to heroku.com, and if you haven't started your project, I recommend that you do, but this is basically how you do the extra credit. So I actually have a bunch of Heroku apps on my main account, but I'm gonna log out and just start from the beginning, where I'm just gonna create an account. And my first name is Howard Chen. It's one of my Berkeley aliases. You, company name. Oh, I'll just call it the Rails Decal. Deploy now, Ruby. So, I get an email confirmation, and that should be coming at some point. But if you would like to follow along, what you should download is the Heroku tool belt. So I have a command line command called Heroku, and to get it, you just look for Heroku CLI, and they'll give you instructions of how to install it, the Heroku tool belt. And basically, there's an installer that you download. If you use the Windows VM, you don't have like a UI to open your browser in the VM. But what you can do is just install the Heroku tool belt on your Windows computer, edit your code and do all your testing on your VM, but just make deployments off your main operating system. But yeah, how come I'm not getting this email? Okay. Well, apparently I have to read a lot of emails, but assuming that it would get there, okay. Assuming that you get the email, I'm logged into my main account. I'm just worried that I'm using too many free applications, but I'll attempt to do it anyways. Is that first, we'll go through the Rails instructions, and I'll look for Heroku deploy Rails 4. I click on this link. How to deploy using Heroku. I'll talk about your local workstation setup. Just make sure you log in on Heroku. Write your app. Basically, how to create a new application. All right. Next, an important thing about your Heroku application is that when you're creating a Rails application, you have the freedom to use whatever database you want. And for the most part of for this class, what you've most likely been using, if you haven't changed this, is SQLite 3, which writes to a text file. But when you deploy an application to Heroku, Heroku automatically uses Postgres. So I will have to tell my Rails application that, hey, I'm going to use Postgres. If I go to my gem file, I'll go to SQLite 3, take that out. Instead, what I'll put in is gempg, which is a dependency so that my Rails models knows how to make calls to a Postgres database. I save that, and normally if you don't have Postgres installed and configured on your computer, if you try to run your Rails application right now, it would break. But lucky for me that I actually have it installed, but I didn't set the configs for it, but I'll ignore that for now. I totally forgot you had to make this. So when you use Postgres, instead of your simple SQLite 3, that you actually have to write configurations for it. So what I'm going to do is just copy and paste this since I don't want to think about it. I will go to my DB folder, or is it, so in the instructions it says config/database.yml. So I go to config, go to database.yml. This is an SQLite 3 configuration. Let's copy the configuration I got from Heroku. Just save that. I already wrote my Rails app. Next, it will say that I have to install this gem just for Heroku to work. This is dependencies that allow my Rails application to work on Heroku. Go back to my gem file, put in Rails 12 factor, save that. And in my gem file, do I specify a Ruby version? Nope. So I'll just follow my Heroku instructions again and say, hey, Ruby 2.2.0. And I believe everyone is developing on 2.2.0 if you followed our install instructions, because we did RVM get 2.2.0 at the beginning of this course. Next, Heroku runs on Git. Basically, that's how you push code onto Heroku. You have to put your Rails application in Git repository and push it up. So what I can now do is git init, which says make this a Git repository, git add period. Make sure to record all the files, git commit, put a terrible commit message, hi. Now all this, all my files are recorded on Git. Now, how do I deploy? Okay, let's see. Wow, I can't believe this email is taking forever. Yeah, it all ties to my Berkeley one, yeah. I made an alias like when I was a freshman when I realized that name was not taken because I thought it was pretty funny. It's actually become a problem. I've accidentally sent my recruiter a few times an email from that email because it automatically does it by alphabetical order. So yeah, something to watch out for when having joke emails. And if you've noticed, I have kind of a silly Berkeley email because I didn't, like back in high school, I didn't realize that you're supposed to put a really professional email for your college one. So I kind of messed up, but it's okay. I'm graduating. So next, I need a tool that I got from my Heroku tool belt called Heroku Create. I run Heroku Create. And what this means is I've created an application on Heroku. There's a virtual machine. Think about it as a little computer somewhere that's not my computer that Heroku is hosting right now, right? It's on this URL, intensewildwood 41707.heroku.app.com. So if I go there, this is my Heroku application. There's no code on it, so it gives me this default. Something cool I wanted to show you is that Or let's do this in order actually. Next, when I ran Heroku create, I now have this machine elsewhere that is running. Now I want to push my code on top of it. This Heroku box works with Git, so I could just say git push, and instead of origin, I could just type in Heroku master. Instead of git push origin master, I type in git push Heroku master, press enter, and bam. It starts building. I sent all the code that I have on my local computer over to my Heroku box, and it's starting to build all of it. It's installing a bunch of dependencies right now, blah, blah, blah. Yeah.
So does this integrate with like if it's also a GitHub repository? Like, can we use the same repo?
Yes. So the way, just a little side information while it's installing. So the way git push works is that there are two arguments that follow it. One is something called a remote, and the other is the name of the branch. I usually put head, like capital HEAD, and what head does is if you're on master, it'll push to that remote's master. What a remote is basically a link, or like in your .git file, you've stored a bunch of remotes, and one of them is origin, which is the one you default copied in. When you do Heroku create, and if you're in a Git repository, it'll go into your remotes and add a new remote called Heroku. So you can look at your Git configs by running git config-e, and you can see that in your Git configs, I have a remote called Heroku, and it points to this address, which was created and stored when I called Heroku create. It's a little bit of random information. So I push this application, and after I run it, something happens. I get an error. Does anyone know why I would get this error? It's because I didn't read the instructions all the way. So like my local machine, the little dyno that's running on Heroku needs to also run a migration. So I could run Heroku run rakedb migrate, run the migration, and bam, it runs a migration. I refresh, and now my Quitter app is on this URL. But before you start copying that URL and attempting to go to it, what you could also do is, since I'm on my Heroku app, wait, log in, please. Hard exchange. So lucky for me, Heroku makes a dashboard where it's easy to manage your applications. This application Quitter I just posted is on Intense Wildwood. I could go to it, go to settings, and I could just rename my app Quitter Beta. Okay. So now I have to go to, instead of this Intense Wildwood whatever.heroku app, I could go to quitter-beta.herokuapp.com, and it'll get me into this application. So I'll sign up with howard@chen.com, password's password. Well, then you can log in as me. Or I don't have an account. I don't know why I tried to log in. Go to sign up, sorry. And everyone could, if you want to, just go on your computer and create an account real quick, because this should ideally work. Make sure that you have quitter-beta.herokuapp.com. Sign up. Now, and after you sign up, what I want you to do is actually create a quit. Oh, God. Wait, how many people are actually attempting to go on the website right now? Like, okay, a good number of you. Okay, that's why. Since I'm really, so basically, Heroku runs on this thing called dynos. And a dyno is a process that runs it's like think about it just as like a CPU. And on the free version, you only get one. It only handles a certain number of requests per second. But if a bunch of people are trying to use the website, it kind of slows down a lot. Fun fact, the real Decal runs on 2 full dynos, so that when you try to check in, it's not as terrible as this. But yeah, ideally that should work, but I think it's just slowing down, /post/new. Oh, no. I'm a moron. I totally forgot something. Right now, what am I trying to do? I'm trying to route to my new page. Well, why can't I route to my new page? So no, what am I trying to do in the big picture? I was trying to create a post, or I was trying to create a quit, right? What I forgot to do in my ability.rb was define who can, if I could create a post. I said I will complete posts. So I'm gonna create right here, and I believe that will work. This is how normal development goes. You check your local, you make edits, you check your local host to make sure that you didn't break your application. So I can now create a new quit. Well, I'm an admin. So if I go to Brandon, this is my local host. Go to brandon@chen.com, save, log in, create new quit. Okay, now it works. So I made an update. What can I do now? I could add the update, make a commit, pick stuff, git push Heroku master. Oh. So basically, I've also changed, since I changed the URL, I've changed the location of my remote. So it's actually supposed to be, what was the name of my app? Quitter Beta. Yeah, so Quitter Beta, save this, push Heroku master. It's gonna rebuild my Rails application. I'll wait for it to compile, blah, blah, blah. Clean, compressing. And okay, let's see. Instead of my local host, I'll be on quitterbeta.herokuapp.com to log in. Now create a new quit. All right, everybody, make a new quit. So what do I quit? Procrastinating. And yeah, I only typed one thing, but someone else said they'd quit CS70, and that someone else is not me. And it's whoever signed up as c@b.com. Thank you. So normally when you create like a full-fledged application, you should make an email verification process and all that. But for the sake of like simple auth, this is what we have. People can create, okay, fine, yeah, my bad. But so the important thing is now that, or something cool, I don't know if it's cool, but as a person that makes the application, I have access to this Heroku application. And right now, I'm a regular user, and I can't edit these. Like, for example, let's say I really don't like this one. Whoever basegod@whitehouse.gov is, I really don't like this, and I want to remove this from my website. How do I do that? I'm not an admin, but I've never created a way to make someone an admin on the front end, which isn't something you should do. You shouldn't give people the ability to do that. You could, on a Heroku app, you could connect to your application through Heroku Run. If you remember the command Heroku Run rakegb migrate, what it does is it'll take everything past run and just run that on your application. So instead, I could do Heroku Run Rails C. So I could actually pop open my Rails console on my remote Heroku thing and see, and I could just do some random things like user.count. I have 21 people signed up within the last however long. Hopefully user.first is me, which is Howard@Chen. So u equal user, u equals user.first. I can't spell first, right? And I could do u.admin equals true. Oh crap. Oh, it's a lowercase t. u.admin equals true. u.save. So now that I'm an admin, theoretically, I could be able to edit this and just update it since I'm now the only admin on the site. So yeah, do we have any questions? Comments, concerns? Because that was my lecture for today. Hopefully you have a semblance of idea how to do authorization, one thing, two, how to deploy a Heroku application. And one of the main points I wanted to get out of this lecture, in case it wasn't like apparent, was that like I didn't need to know how to really do anything, or like I had to know very little of how to do anything at the beginning. All I had to do was just look up libraries, look up their instructions on how to implement them, and then what I got from beginning of last week was an application where you could create posts, edit posts. You have the abilities to sign up, log in. The front end is responsive to which person that is logged in. You can only edit your own posts, and that admins could edit anything. All that was just done simply through like 2.5 hours of me while explaining, and just plug and play with a bunch of libraries. And now thousands of people can use our application. So yeah, hopefully, not hopefully. This is what you're going to do for your second project. Just come up with an idea, build it, put that application on Heroku, and do a little screen share, or like submit like a 2-minute video of how to use your application. Yeah, let's see, last closing notes. I'm going to put up the check-in code, 1, and 2, that there won't be a front-end lecture today. So yeah.